Hi there. My name is David Batsoffen and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. And at the moment, I'm doing a series of interviews or chats, if you want, called In Conversation With. And today I find myself in conversation with the CEO of BirdLife Africa. That's Mark Anderson. Mark, how are you doing?
Well, thanks, David. Nice to chat to you.
You too. Where does lockdown find you?
I live in Joburg in Parkhurst, so I've been working remotely for 3.5 months now.
Interesting. Just as a matter of interest, have you found that bird life in your garden has increased with this lockdown?
I'm not sure, and that's something that's being debated by bird watchers, particularly early on during lockdown. I think that during this time of the year, birds also in urban environments become more dependent on bird feeders. There's less
Right.
wild bird food around. They may move into the gardens and feed on whatever we put on the feeders.
Yeah.
But also, I think people are feeding the birds more regularly because they are at home all the time. So probably putting more food in the bird feeders than they usually do.
Mark, why is it that birding is so popular? And every one of us, whether we have animal books in our library or not, has a copy of this, or of Roberts at least, or Newman's. But there's always a bird book in almost every house I've ever been into.
I think the reason, David, is that birds are so accessible. So unlike a lot of other taxonomic groups, you don't necessarily get exposure to them. If you look out your window, a bird will be flying past. If you lie in bed in the morning as the sun's rising, you'll hear a bird singing. And I think birds are colorful, they're pretty, there's an incredible diversity of them, about 11,000 species around the world. So yeah, they're all around us, and I think we can't avoid them. They're in our face.
Why the plethora of hardy-daws? That's what I want to know. Can't we get rid of them?
So hardy-daws have benefited from the way we've changed the environment. So the creation of golf courses and parks and gardens have benefited hardy-daws. I mean, they weren't in the Western Cape until a decade or so ago. They've now moved in and they've become more common. They're here to stay, unfortunately. And they have their benefits as well. They aerate the soil and they deal with invertebrates in the garden.
And the other one that, I don't know if you could class them as a pest, are Egyptian geese. They seem to have taken over every piece of waterway. And even I have a friend who has geese now breeding in a swimming pool.
That's right. Geese have probably derived the same benefit as hardy-daws. The open spaces that we've created for them have really benefited them. And their numbers have also proliferated, including in the Western Cape. And now in the wheat fields in the Overberg and the Swartland, Egyptian geese have actually become a bit of a problem. And the farmers don't know what to do with them. So, and again, they're here to stay. Egyptian geese are indigenous, as are hardy-daws. They're protected. And yeah, we've got to live with them, as we've got to live with so many other birds. Indian miners are here to stay too. We're not going to get rid of them in a hurry.
No matter how hard we try. It's interesting that up here, I'm originally from the Eastern Cape, where glossy starlings were seen as vermin. Yet here, when you find a glossy starling, like in the Lowveld, people go ooh-ah and get all excited.
That's right. Yeah, glossy starlings, I think, could probably become more common in Joburg and the sort of forests that we've created in urban areas. And yeah, I see them as well. In fact, when we go on our walks in the morning or the evening, and I see a glossy starling, I'll usually take a second glance because they are particularly pretty birds.
They are indeed. Tell me about a young Mark Anderson growing up. When you were in matric, for instance, did you know that you would eventually end up being the CEO of BirdLife SA? Or is that not on your radar?
I didn't think I'd ever become an administrator or a manager, but I knew that I was going to have a career in conservation. And that was from not even matric, it was from much younger than that, from when I was 7 or 8 maybe. I knew that there was only one thing I was going to do with my life. So it's always been conservation. I'm getting involved in managing an organization is not something I expected. And sometimes I wonder whether it's maybe really what I should be doing. I do hope there will be a few years in the bush sometime. But yeah, it's been an interesting experience. It's nice to be really at the forefront of conservation.
I'm always in awe of bird photographers. They seem to have inordinate patience. I cannot sit in a hide for hours and hours and hours waiting for one particular species to pop up in front of my lens. Yet birders are prepared to do this, and in some cases, years. And tens of thousands of images.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, and one of the reasons why I think bird watching has become so popular is that people are really enjoying digital photography. In the old days with slide film, you'd be very conservative with the number of images you took. Nowadays, it doesn't matter. And the cameras have got so good and they're actually so easy to use. It's relatively easy to take, reasonable bird photographs. But yeah, they do have patience. And my wife and I are bird photographers. That's what we do in our spare time. And I remember a couple of years ago, 2 years, maybe 3 years ago, we had our wedding anniversary up in Gobberskloof at Carissa Moya. And we were in a little hide, pretty much makeshift hide that David Letzalo, the guide there, put up. And we sat on our bums, photographing twin spots and other birds that came to this hide, the seed that he'd hid in the crevices in the logs. And I think we sat there for 4 or 5 hours with hardly moving, and we didn't get hungry or thirsty. We were just absolutely captivated by what was coming and sitting in front of us. And it was, in the shade of the trees, but we managed to get some good photographs. So we have a lot of patience. Other examples, we've been in the Lowveld looking at dusky larks, and on our way back to actually have breakfast, we haven't had breakfast yet. We found a pair of dusky larks once, and we ended up watching them and photographing them for another 2 hours. We were hungry 2 hours ago, and now we're even hungrier, but the bird photography took precedent.
Why are larks and pipits so difficult to identify?
Yeah, for some people, they are not, surprisingly. But yeah, the little brown jobs are not easy. And it's probably not only larks and pipits, but cisticulars too, and a few other species as well. Even some of the raptors, some of the brown raptors are difficult to tell.
Yeah.
But the larks, I think, are probably a bit easier than the pipits because they do use different habitats. So usually if you're in a specific habitat, you can narrow it down to a couple of species. And also the calls are very, very different. So the larks one can generally sort out quite easily. Pipits maybe take a little bit longer. Cisticulars probably even longer. But there's a wonderful book that Fancy Peacock produced, which is unfortunately out of print, called LBJ's Southern Africa.
I remember that, yeah.
Probably the best bird book. People around the world think it's the best bird book ever produced. It is exceptional. It's unavailable now. So if you ever see one in a second-hand shop or see a few, buy them all.
Grab
They're
it.
going to be worth money one day. Yeah, so that does help with the LBJs. And it is tough. But, the late Richard Liversidge was a good friend of ours. He always said, try and find 3 features. He always said if there were 3 features that you could pick up in that bird would help you separate it from anything else. And it could be, whether it moves its tail frequently, bobs its tail, whether there was a defined supercilium, an eyebrow, or other reasons. But people mustn't be put off bird watching by the difficult to see birds. There's hundreds and hundreds to see before you have to even worry about the pipits and the larks and cisticulars, because most of our birds are colorful.
A lot of the new birding apps have calls on them. And there seems to be a split between people saying, yes, play the call and let's see if the bird will respond. And others saying, no, don't play the call because it may be invasive, because you don't necessarily know what that particular call is telling the bird.
Yeah, so we say you've got to use playbacks, callbacks, very judiciously, and to a very limited extent. There's a few people, in fact, even some of our staff at BirdLife South Africa refuse to use them at all to call up a bird. It's not so much if you're out in an area where the birders don't frequent, so they would never be played at the playback, the call.
Right.
But if you're in Skakuza or Pretoria Skop or Letaba or Olifants, where people are doing it regularly, you're going to be interfering with the birds. They're not sure whether it's another bird that's trying to invade your territory. It's worse when the birds are breeding as well.
Yeah.
So we have a position statement on it. It's on our website. I can't remember all the details, but we have developed that, and basically just all it says, if you're going to use them very carefully. And I've used them over the years. We're very careful about using them. Where they are very useful, if you're sitting in your car and you're in Richplay Nature Reserve or Suikerbosrand or wherever else, and you hear a bird calling and you're thinking, is it this or is it that? You can quietly play it to yourself and determine, which bird you're actually listening to. So that's one thing you do. The other thing is a lot of people record the bird calls. These days you can actually record it on your phone and get a really reasonable, recording. And then we get sent these as well. People send us these calls and say, this is what we heard, what is it? And sometimes you can't hear because the neighbors' dogs are barking, as our neighbors' dogs are barking a moment ago. And then you difficult to make out. But yeah, bird calls are useful, and I think everybody should have them. Some of the apps today include the bird calls, and in fact, the Sasol 5, which is about to be released in the next few days, has a barcode which you can scan using an app that you can download for free, and you're able to play the call of the birds. So,
I was going to say, I was hoping to actually have a copy of the book with me when we did this interview, but unfortunately, nobody seems to have one readily available as yet.
Yes, I actually received an advanced copy because we've recommended it all.
Yes.
And we're doing the launch. In fact, the Pippa Parker, the publisher, called me a couple of minutes ago just to discuss the launch that we're having next week. But I don't think the books are available. They're unlikely to be in exclusive books or CNA and the other outlets yet.
Now, how is that one? I mean, you've seen the advanced copy. How does that differ from the current version? And is it a book that you have to keep update? Although you've mentioned the barcode, which isn't in the previous one, so that is definitely a must-have.
There's a few improvements, and I'm going to go through them in a lot more detail between now and next Thursday when we have the launch. But one of the things is a lot of the illustrations have been redone, and Fancy Peacock, the same Fancy Peacock who wrote and illustrated the LBJ book, has redone all of the seabird illustrations. So there's an improvement. But our knowledge is improving all the time. There's a whole lot of researchers, ornithologists in South Africa, particularly the University of Cape Town, that are studying birds, and they're continually advancing our knowledge of species. And the Red Data Book statuses, for example, are changing. Names are changing. So these are updated in the books. And the books are not that expensive. And there's a committed group of bird watchers in this country, tens of thousands of them, who will buy this book regardless. You've got to have the latest one. And what's been really nice, David, over the years is that we get books donated to the office. I will see now, we will see now in the next few weeks and months, we will have lots and lots of copies of Sasol Birds of Southern Africa edition 4 donated to our organization. And we then distribute them to needy people or needy causes. And so there's lots of people who can't afford bird books. And there's more and more bird clubs and nature clubs starting up at rural schools of historically disadvantaged kids. And we've donated 10, 20 copies to those clubs, so they can fulfill an important role. So the last thing one wants to ever do with an outdated book is throw it in the bin or recycle.
No,
there's a home for it somewhere.
I don't know how people physically throw books out, Mark. I can't even throw magazines out. The last time I threw a bunch of magazines away, I made sure it was on a Monday when the garbage collection happened, so that I knew I couldn't save them. And I put them out when I heard the vehicle coming, type of thing. But books, I can't even throw away publishing catalogs. Yeah. I'm that pedantic about my books.
Yeah, and we have a nice library at our office, which is in Dunkeld West, a beautiful library actually. And we also own 50% of the library, the bird library at the University of Cape Town, which is the biggest ornithological book collection in the Southern Hemisphere. And we're getting more and more donations of books, particularly in people's estates. And we always look and see what we have, and we're missing it, we'll add it to the library. We see what the Fitzpatrick Institute at ECT needs. We also then see whether there's any deserving causes to which books can donate it. We sell a few in our little shop. But there's always people who want books. Yeah. In fact, even our magazine, African BirdLife magazine, which comes out 6 times a year, somebody emailed me just a few days ago, and for whatever reason, they want to give away their back issues. They don't want to throw them away. And they have 22. We've produced 47 issues of the new magazine, and they have 22. And I just said, well, let me know, because I know that if I put the word out there, there will be some young birder who maybe wasn't able to buy them, or was still a high school student at that stage, who would welcome them, because these don't date. Magazines in particular. So you can read them in the future.
It was interesting. Some years ago, I had a bird visit me in my garden, and I can't for the life of me remember. It was, I want to say, a little sparrowhawk. It might well have been. And I posted off the image to your magazine, and it was published. And I got all excited. And then I turned over the page, and lo and behold, there was another little sparrowhawk in Greenside. So I phoned. I looked up the guy, and I phoned him, and I said, have you got any more pictures of the bird? And we exchanged photographs, and we realized it was the same bird. I mean, I'm just up the road from him type of thing. And it was
Okay.
interesting that both images had been published in the same edition of your magazine.
Yeah, wow. The nice thing about publishing people's photographs is that they're obviously then contributing to our knowledge.
Yeah.
And quite often people are seeing something which had never been seen before, or it's a bird out of its range, and it could be a bird with slightly different plumage. But also, if you want a committed supporter of your magazine, publish a letter or an article or a photograph, and then there will be, we've had people that have published a photograph in our magazine, and literally we wouldn't have enough back issues of that particular edition to provide them with, because they've bought them and they've sent them off to friends all over the world. They're so proud of their picture that's been published.
That's wonderful. Mark, for people who are now starting out as a birder, what do you suggest is the minimum kit? Now, I've sat in hides with proper birders and who are using, without mentioning the names of the people, 800 to 1200 mil lenses and spotter scopes and all sorts of equipment that costs an inordinate amount of money. But as a beginner birder who doesn't have 300,000 Rand to spend on equipment, what sort of the entry level would you recommend?
Yeah, I think as a start, you need a pair of binoculars, and there's relatively reasonably priced binoculars that one can purchase. I think ultimately, if you become more serious about the hobby, you're going to end up buying an expensive pair of binoculars. And I won't mention any brands, but a lot of the outdoor stores sell reasonably priced binoculars these days, and they're generally okay. If you look after them.
Yeah.
I think the better quality binoculars, they can survive being dropped on the floor. They could survive a rainstorm. But the more reasonably priced ones, I think, generally are not as hardy. So I think, but you need a pair of binoculars and you need a field guide. I think those are the two important things. And then, the field guide doesn't have to be the print version as well, because there's a host of apps that one can download. You can have all the information there with you on your phone. And then what's useful, as people always say, is a notebook and a pen. So when you're out there, make a list of the birds you see. And also, if you see something which you can't identify, just do a little drawing of it, even if it's a rough drawing, and note some of the features. And then you can go back and consult your books and consult some friends and try and identify it. And then also, I think what we encourage people to do is become a member of their local bird club, because the bird clubs have really been fantastic. And that's the main role of, in fact, one role of many that they fulfill, is that they're the nurturing ground for young bird watchers. BirdLife South Africa is a conservation organization. So us as the mother organization, we have 42 affiliated bird clubs. We don't do training courses. We don't do outings as well. We're trying to save these birds from going extinct,
right,
protecting their habitats. But the bird clubs, and they're all over the country, most of them have monthly meetings, have workshops, they have outings, guided walks. And in Joburg, there's a number of very large and very successful clubs. Some have been going for an incredibly long time. So that's what I would encourage. And go birding with somebody who's a bit more experienced. You'll find, I've actually heard from many new bird watchers who've said they've been out with Wits Bird Club or Rand Barbet Bird Club or BirdLife Northern Gauteng, and they've been so impressed with how welcoming the birders were, the more experienced birders. So, saddle up next to one of the people you can see who knows a bit more than others, and just learn from them. And one learns very quickly. It may be daunting. South Africa, there's 870 bird species. It's a lot. It's about not quite 10%, 9% or so of the world's birds. Wow. There's a lot of birds. But you quickly get to know them. And, there's so many that are so distinct and obvious and so interesting. And start in your garden or the local park. We've got bird feeders in our garden. We've got an indigenous garden. From where I've been sitting and working in the last 3.5 months, looking out our glass doors, whenever I look out the doors, there's a bird doing something. One doesn't have to travel very far to watch birds.
But and from a camera point of view, or should they, rather start enjoying bird watching rather than bird photography straight off?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, David, because there's more and more people, and not the majority, it's some, that are now carrying a camera rather than a pair of binoculars and photographing the bird and then going back later and then uploading it and in Photoshop or whatever, and then trying to identify it. But that's a different game. Once you start photographing birds, I think that becomes pretty costly. And if you go into the hides at some of the, and there's various hides in and around Joburg and many around the country. Morrievale in particular, they've got some really good hides. You look at the equipment that some of these photographers have. I mean, you could be sitting next to somebody who's got R500,000 worth of equipment in their hands. And so, it becomes quite extreme. But these days, I mean, some of these point and shoot cameras are, equally effective. And some of our staff use them as well, and they magnify quite significantly. And it's often good enough for identifying the birds or having a record shot. In fact, even better than that. You may not publish on the cover of a magazine with a picture taken like that, but then slowly grow the pastime. And also the photography shops these days sell, secondhand gear as well. We bought quite a bit of secondhand gear over the years.
Okay. Now, you mentioned bird species, and I watch with interest on your Facebook thread when you say, please congratulate so-and-so for having seen their 500th species or whatever it might be. How do you know that they're telling you the truth?
Yeah. It's a bit like asking the golfer who goes into the rough and is not kicking the ball from behind a clump of grass to have a more favorable lie. I don't know. It's what I think most, most of it hopefully will be honest. And it's, it's just it's you really. You've got to make that decision yourself. I do think that most bird watchers are honest, as hopefully most golfers are honest. And I don't know if somebody's going to cheat and fool themselves and fool others. It's just up to them.
They're only lying to themselves. It's like running a marathon and then taking a shortcut type of thing. That
exactly. I mean, there's been a few comrades cheats over the years, and why do it?
Exactly.
But we've got a few people. There's a few people I know, including a few of our staff, that have to absolutely convince themselves it's that species, and they're going to be a host of reasons why it's that species as well. They won't tick it for the first time unless they've seen it. They won't tick it based on the call, for example. So people, are strict. But those you make those rules yourself, really.
Yeah.
And those records aren't of scientific value. Those are personal records. And I actually, to be honest with you, and frank, and I think people frown upon this, I don't actually keep a list of the birds I've seen. I don't know how many birds I've seen in South Africa, Southern Africa, or the world, and I've traveled a lot around the world.
Well, you've just blown my next 3 questions. So thank you for that.
Go for it then.
No, those were going to be my next question. How many species have you seen? Well, the answer is you don't know.
I don't know, to be honest, and I wouldn't even be able to guess. But I can tell you now, every bird I've seen, I've absolutely enjoyed. And just some examples. Tonga and I have traveled quite a lot. Not during COVID. I'm not sure when we'll travel again, but we were in Amazon last year and we were in Amazon the year before. And we went really amazing places in the Amazon and in other parts of South America.
Yeah.
And going into these jungles that we had 5 days to explore and get to know, we decided in advance that we'd rather see 100 birds really well than 300 birds badly. And really well would mean, we can sit and watch a bird for several hours and just be absolutely fascinated by its behavior. And because we are wildlife photographers, we try and get good images of the bird. But for me, it's not about fleeting glimpse and then moving on to the next one. And for some people, that's maybe fine. My wife is a botanist as well, and she's also interested in reptiles. I think we drive some of the guides nuts that we do use when we travel. But we just lap it up. I mean, I just absolutely enjoy it. And I just look at some birds, beautiful birds that are doing interesting things, and I just absolutely marvel and just think, gee whiz, what an honor and a privilege it is for me to be able to travel to this place, to just watch these birds and marvel at their beauty.
I'm always excited. I mean, I get excited by lilac-breasted rollers still, because they're just so special. And if you sit in any bird, if you sit and watch it long enough, I mean, one of my favorite images is a brown snake eagle eating a puff adder and pooing at the same time. So I've got the snake going in one end and poo coming out the other. And I think the only reason he pooped is because we came around a corner and surprised him. He wasn't expecting a vehicle.
Yeah. And yeah, so, and there are birds like in the garden. I mean, there's quite a lot of Cape sparrows in the suburb we live, and they're in our garden all the time. I mean, those males are beautiful. They really are.
Mm.
I mean, even common miners, not everybody's friends, but look at them very carefully. The common miners in our garden, there's a pair that live here. We feed them, they've got a home here. And the number of birds that they mimic, they mimic the puffbacks. They're mimicking a host of species. So, and they don't belong here. The numbers have increased. They're probably competing a bit with our indigenous birds. We don't have a hope in hell of getting rid of them.
Yeah.
So we just watch them and enjoy them. I do a lot of walking. Walking is my favorite thing. Particularly the last 2 months, I've walked. I've missed 4 days in 2 months, and I do about 8 to 10 k's a day.
Well done.
And my eyes are in the trees and in the sky. And you can walk and see nothing if you're not interested. If you haven't been your eyes haven't been open to the world of birds. Or you can walk your 4 kilometers or 10 kilometers, whatever distance you do, and it can be so much more rewarding if you're looking at the birds in the trees and looking at those that are flying over, and also just listening to their calls. I mean, I know in the walks that I've got several routes I do. I know where I can, at this time of the year, be expected to hear white-bellied sunbirds. I know there's a Cape Robin chat that also mimics a puffback. In fact, there's 2 of them. And I know when I go in that area, I would listen, because that Cape Robin chat could be mimicking the puffback.
I didn't know how clever the fork-tailed drongo was at mimicking a variety of not only birds, but animal alarm calls.
Exactly. Yes.
They're sneaky little buggers, those things.
Yeah. I think birds are clever. We were watching a little YouTube clip with Chris Packham this weekend, where he was sitting in an aviary with a student who'd done some work and taught a crow, can't remember which species of crow it was, to do a whole range of things, tasks, in order to retrieve some food. And I watched this and I shared it with Tanya. I said, "You've got to watch this." I mean, it's just mind-blowing to think that an animal is so clever. These miners as well. I mean, if you took a miner from a nest, excuse me, and hand reared it, I think you'd get it to speak, you'd get it to do a whole lot of things. Not that one wants to do that. But birds are marvelous. It goes back to your first question, as why birds? Because literally, they're everywhere and they're doing incredible things. And it's an introduction to the natural world. And I know so many parents these days, including some of our staff, including some of my colleagues, even family, introducing their children to the natural world through birds. Because you can't start with an insect or a lizard that you hardly get to see, but you can easily start with birds.
Now, just to wrap up, Mark, and thank you for your time, because I know that you've got other stuff to go on to. Bird of the Year, how do you choose that? This year, it's the South African version of the American turkey, the ground hornbill, which is a huge bird. If you've never seen them, and you come across them in the veld, and they're normally walking in single file, they're quite an impressive a bird species. But how did you come up with that?
So what we do is we invite nominations from our members and from the bird clubs, from our staff and from the board.
Right.
We always get a whole lot of nominations. And we have a marketing committee as well that will evaluate the nominations. The first thing we do is we vote independently for the nominations that have been received that year. And then our marketing coordinator then tallies those votes. And then we meet for an hour or so and we look at the votes. And also, I think because the marketing team have been involved with BirdLife South Africa for a long time, and these include some volunteers, including the previous head of an advertising agency. And they look carefully at the species that have been nominated, and also whether it's similar to the bird the year before.
Right.
And whether using that bird, we're able to get a message across. Because the main aim of Bird of the Year is to create awareness about birds. Not necessarily that specific bird, but about birds in general, and also an aspect of the biology of that bird. So we've had barn swallow as Bird of the Year. We use that as an opportunity to raise awareness about migration and about climate change. We've had Tristan albatross, which is one of the most threatened albatrosses in the world. We use that opportunity to raise awareness about the problems in the ocean, particularly around overfishing. And this year, the southern ground hornbill, it's a bird of the savannas, and we've partnered with Mabuela Ground Hornbill Project. And I must also recognize the funding we get from the Hans Housen Charitable Trust. because a lot of it is about developing learning resources for schools and for pupils.
Yeah.
So that's all beautifully done, uploaded into our website and to Facebook, and we produce a poster as well. It's around awareness, but it's, choosing a bird of the year is a team effort. We wouldn't have 2 vultures in this consecutive years. We wouldn't have 2 garden birds, but it's a diversity of birds. And fortunately, there's 870 odd, so we're not going to run out of species in my lifetime.
And Lucy is doing wonderful work at that Mabula ground hornbill project.
One of my heroes. In fact, I've got an email from her just now. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, and they've got challenges because conserving a species like that is not easy. It's a bird that needs wide open spaces, and they need undisturbed areas. They need a healthy prey base. They need big nest cavities in which they can nest. So she absolutely has her work cut out, but they are having some success, and we're very honoured to partner with her in some of her efforts. Our staff, 2 of our staff, are very involved, and Anlene Smith-Robinson, the head of conservation, she serves on the board of the Mabula Ground Hornbill project.
Well done, and I hope that despite what else has gone on in our world in 2020, the ground hornbill will be seen as one of the highlights rather than one of the lowlights of the year.
Yeah, it's and I've been very impressed with what we put together. We also do these little fluffy toys and pin badges and T-shirts. Of course, with the office being closed, our sales haven't been so good. So there's so much collateral problems around COVID-19.
Mark, if your offices are closed at the moment, so even if people do want to support you by buying some of those pins or some of your merchandise, you don't have an online store that they can go to?
Online store is going to go live soon. It's all ready. And in fact, we're going to be very proud of what we've been doing with our online store. But until now, there's even been a problem with distribution. So we are sending out, we are distributing particularly the Bird of the Year materials, and we're using Postnet at the moment. So we're doing every Thursday, I think it is, our shop manager, who's also our membership manager, goes and distributes a number of items. The Sasol 5 bird guide as well, we'll be using Postnet to distribute that. I actually went up to the post office yesterday to receive my magazine, African BirdLife magazine, which had been posted 3 weeks ago from Cape Town, had arrived yet. Excuse me, and it's not there yet. So I understand there's a backlog of sorting.
Yeah.
So this is a problem.
If people want to find out more about membership, etc., they can go to your website?
They can, all the details are there. And if you have any problems, it's really easy just to remember to send an email to info@birdlife.org.za. And Kathleen, who's our receptionist, she also manages that info@birdlife address, and she checks it several times a day. She then forwards the emails to the relevant staff member, and staff will deal with it timelessly.
Great stuff, because at the moment, as we said, your offices are closed because of COVID-19, but hopefully at some particular point, maybe before 31st December, we will be back to a regular sort of whatever post-normal is going to be.
And one doesn't know when it's, we've got no plans to go back to the office soon. We've got a board subcommittee which is helping advise me, particularly on financial matters. We also discuss reopening. We're working so well remotely, and I suppose one advantage is that winters are quiet time for field work.
Right.
There's no real need for us to be up and about, so we're using it to catch up with report writing, submitting lots and lots of funding applications. We had our weekly staff meeting this morning for an hour, and all of the staff joined that meeting. Zoom is an amazing thing.
It is indeed, as I found out. Mark, thank you so much. I've been in conversation with Mark Anderson, who's the CEO of BirdLife SA. Mark, thank you so much for joining me and for giving me of your time and your expertise.
Thanks, David. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Anytime.